A journey to Antarctica, the coldest place on Earth. Hello everyone! Welcome to our story. Many of us dream of visiting new and exciting places. We see them in books and movies. These places can be very far away and very different from our homes. Our story today is about a journey to a real place. It is the coldest, windiest, and most remote place on our planet. It is a land of ice and snow. Before we begin our story, I have a question for you. What is the weather like where you live today? Is it hot or cold? Tell me in the comments below. I would love to read your answers. Now let us begin our journey. Our story is about a man named Thomas. Thomas was a simple man. He lived in a small, quiet town. The town had green trees and warm summers. Thomas worked in a library. He loved books. Every day he was surrounded by stories of adventure, stories of faraway lands, and stories of brave explorers. He was a quiet man, but in his heart, he had a big dream. His dream was to visit Antarctica. He read every book he could find about it. He looked at pictures of the great white continent. He saw vast fields of snow that never ended. He saw mountains of ice that touched the blue sky. He saw pictures of strange and wonderful animals, like penguins and seals. The more he read, the bigger his dream became. He told himself, "One day I will go there. I will see it with my own eyes." For many years, Thomas saved his money. He did not buy new clothes. He did not buy a new car. He ate simple food. Every dollar he saved went into a special jar. The jar had a label on it. The label said, Antarctica. Years passed. Thomas grew a little older. His hair had some gray in it now, but his dream was still young and strong. One day he opened the jar. It was full. He counted all the money. It was enough. He could finally go on his great adventure. Thomas felt a mix of excitement and fear. He was excited to see his dream come true. He was a little afraid because he had never done anything like this before. He was a man who liked quiet rooms and books, not cold winds and ice. But his dream was stronger than his fear. He started to prepare. Going to Antarctica was not easy. It required special things. Thomas bought the warmest clothes he could find. He bought a very thick coat, special pants, and big strong boots. He bought warm gloves and a hat that covered his face. He looked funny in his new clothes, but he knew they would keep him safe from the extreme cold. He bought a strong backpack to carry his things and a new camera to take pictures. He wanted to remember everything he saw. Finally, the day came. Thomas said goodbye to his small town and his job at the library. He traveled for a very long time on an airplane. He flew over oceans and continents. After many hours, he arrived in a city at the very southern tip of South America. This city was the last stop before Antarctica. The city was busy and loud. It felt very different from his quiet town. From there, he would take a special boat, an icebreaker, to the white continent. Thomas stood on the deck of the big boat. The air was cool and smelled of salt from the sea. The boat started to move, slowly leaving the city behind. Thomas watched the land disappear. In front of him was only the great, wide ocean. He was on his way. His journey to Antarctica had begun. He felt a big smile on his face. The librarian from the small town was now an explorer. The journey on the boat was long. For several days, they sailed south. The ocean was a deep blue. Sometimes the water was calm. Other times, big waves rocked the boat from side to side. Thomas spent his time on the deck, watching the sea. He saw seabirds flying in the sky, following the boat. The air became colder each day. He had to wear his warm coat all the time now. Then, one morning, someone shouted, "Iceberg!" Thomas ran to the side of the boat, and there it was, the first iceberg. It was huge. It was much bigger than he had imagined. It was a floating mountain of ice. The sun shone on it, and it sparkled with a beautiful blue and white light. It was so white, it almost hurt his eyes to look at it. The iceberg moved slowly and silently in the dark water. It was a powerful and beautiful sight. Thomas took out his camera and took his first picture of this icy world. Soon, there were more icebergs. They came in all shapes and sizes. Some were small and flat. Others were tall and looked like castles made of ice. The sea was full of them. The captain of the boat had to be very careful, moving the ship slowly between the giant pieces of ice. Thomas felt like he was in another world. It was a world made of water and ice. After 2 more days, he saw land. It was not green land with trees. It was white land. A long white line on the horizon. It was Antarctica. His heart beat faster. He had seen this in pictures 1,000 times. But seeing it for real was completely different. It was so much bigger, so much wider, so much more real. The boat arrived at a small research station. This would be Thomas's home for his adventure. The station was a small collection of simple buildings. They were brightly colored, red and blue, so they could be seen easily against the white snow. A small group of people met the boat. They were scientists and guides who lived and worked in this cold place. One man walked up to Thomas. He had a warm, friendly face and a thick brown beard. He was wearing a big red jacket. "Welcome to Antarctica," the man said with a smile. "My name is David. I will be your guide." Thomas shook David's hand. David's hand was warm and strong. Thomas felt safe with him. David would help him explore this strange and beautiful land. David showed Thomas where he would sleep. It was a small, simple room, but it was warm and comfortable. Through the small window, Thomas could see the endless white snow and the pale blue sky. He was finally here. The dream was real. The next morning, David woke Thomas up early. "Today, we prepare for our journey," David said. "We will travel inland, away from the coast. We will see the heart of Antarctica." Their vehicle was a huge truck. It was not a normal truck. It had 4 giant wheels, bigger than Thomas himself. These wheels were special, made to travel over deep snow and ice. The truck was like a small house on wheels. It had a place to sleep, a small kitchen to cook food, and a heater to keep them warm. Thomas and David spent the whole day packing the truck. They packed boxes of food. The food was mostly dry and canned, because fresh food was impossible to get here. They packed tanks of fuel for the truck and a big tent for emergencies. They packed warm sleeping bags, a first aid kit, and many tools. In Antarctica, you had to be prepared for anything. You were very far from any help. Thomas learned that everything had to be done carefully. A small mistake here could become a big problem. David was very experienced. He checked everything 2 or 3 times. He showed Thomas how to use the special radio to talk to the research station. "We will talk to them every day," David explained. "So they always know where we are and that we are safe." The next day, they were ready. The sun was shining brightly in the clear blue sky. The air was crisp and extremely cold. Thomas was wearing all his warm clothes. He felt like a big round ball, but he was very warm. He climbed into the giant truck. David started the engine. It made a loud, powerful noise. The truck began to move, slowly rolling out of the station and onto the great white snow. Thomas looked back at the small, colorful buildings of the station. Soon, they were just small dots. Then, they were gone. All around them was nothing but white. A flat, endless plain of snow and ice in every direction. The sky above was a huge, empty blue. Thomas was filled with a sense of wonder. The world here was so simple, just white and blue. There were no trees, no buildings, no roads. There was only the vast, empty space. And it was quiet. The only sound was the engine of their truck and the crunch of the snow under the giant wheels. It was a silence he had never known before. It was the sound of being completely alone in a huge, empty world. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" David said, not taking his eyes off the white landscape ahead. "Yes," Thomas said softly. "It is." He knew this was a place that very few people get to see. He felt very, very lucky. He was just a simple librarian, but here he was, traveling across the bottom of the world. Their days fell into a simple routine. They would wake up early in the morning inside the warm truck. Outside, the world would be silent and white. David would make breakfast. They ate hot porridge and drank hot coffee. The hot food and drink felt good in the cold environment. After breakfast, they would start driving. David drove carefully, his eyes always watching the snow in front of them. Sometimes the surface looked flat, but there could be hidden dangers, like deep cracks in the ice called crevasses. David knew how to read the snow. He knew where it was safe to drive. Thomas sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window. The view was almost always the same: white snow, blue sky, but it was never boring. The way the sun hit the snow changed the colors. Sometimes it was brilliant white, sometimes it was soft yellow or pink. During the long sunrise and sunset, the sky was the clearest blue he had ever seen. After many hours of driving, they would stop. Sometimes they stopped to eat lunch. Other times, they stopped because David saw something. "Look," David said one afternoon, pointing to some dark shapes in the distance. "Penguins." Thomas's heart jumped with excitement. He had waited his whole life to see penguins in their natural home. David stopped the truck and they got out. The cold air hit Thomas's face. They walked slowly and quietly towards the dark shapes. As they got closer, Thomas could see them clearly. It was a large group of penguins, a colony. There were hundreds of them. They were emperor penguins, the biggest type of penguin. They were beautiful, with their black heads, white bellies, and a touch of yellow on their necks. Some of the penguins were standing together in a group to stay warm. Others were walking around. Their walk was very funny. They waddled from side to side on their short legs. Some of them slid on their bellies across the ice. It looked like they were having fun. They made soft, trumpeting sounds, talking to each other. Thomas and David stood at a distance. They did not want to disturb the animals. Thomas took out his camera. He took picture after picture. He wanted to capture this amazing moment. He watched a mother penguin feed her small fluffy chick. He saw two penguins bowing to each other in a kind of dance. They were so full of life in this empty, frozen land. Thomas felt a deep connection to these incredible birds. They were strong and resilient, living in the harshest place on Earth. They spent over an hour just watching the penguins. Thomas could have stayed there all day, but they had to keep moving. As they walked back to the truck, Thomas couldn't stop smiling. On another day, they saw seals. The seals were lying on the ice, near a crack in the sea ice. They were huge animals, much bigger than Thomas. They were fat and looked very comfortable as they rested in the weak sun. Most of them were sleeping. One or two lifted their heads slowly to look at the truck. But they were not afraid. They knew they were safe here. This was their home. Thomas took more pictures. The seals looked so peaceful. They were masters of this cold world. Life on the truck was simple. In the evenings, they would park the truck for the night. David would cook dinner. They ate simple but warm meals, like pasta or rice with canned vegetables. After dinner, David would get on the radio. He would talk to the base station, telling them their location and that everything was okay. Then, they would have free time. David often read a book. Thomas would look at the pictures he took on his camera, remembering the penguins and the seals. Or he would write in a journal. He wanted to write down everything he saw and felt. He described the colors of the ice, the sound of the wind, and the feeling of the intense cold. He wanted to be able to read it later, back in his warm little town, and remember his great adventure. Sometimes they would talk. Thomas told David about his life in the library, about his dream of coming to Antarctica. David told Thomas about his life as a guide. He had been to Antarctica many times. He loved this place. He respected its power and its beauty. "This place teaches you to be humble," David said one evening. "It reminds you that nature is much bigger and more powerful than we are." At night, Thomas would look out the truck's window. If the sky was clear, he could see the stars. There were no city lights here to block the view. The stars were incredibly bright and clear. They looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. He also saw the aurora australis, the southern lights. It was a magical display of green and purple light dancing silently across the night sky. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It felt like the sky was putting on a special show just for them. Lying in his sleeping bag at night, in the deep silence of the Antarctic night, Thomas would feel a profound sense of peace. The world he knew, with its cars and noise and busy people, felt very far away. Here, everything was simple and pure. He felt like he was at the edge of the world, a guest in this amazing kingdom of ice. They had been traveling for over a week. The weather had been good to them. The sun was out most days, and the wind was calm. But David knew that the weather in Antarctica could change very quickly. One morning, Thomas woke up and noticed something different. The world outside was not bright and sunny. It was grey. The sky was covered with thick, dark clouds. The wind was starting to make a low, howling sound. "A storm is coming," David said calmly as he made breakfast. "A big one. We will not be able to travel today. We must stay here and wait." Thomas felt a little nervous. He had read about Antarctic blizzards. They were powerful and dangerous. But David was not worried. He was prepared. After breakfast, they checked everything outside the truck one last time. They made sure nothing was loose, that the wind could blow away. Then they went inside and sealed the door. Soon, the storm began. The wind grew stronger and stronger. It screamed and howled around their truck. It felt like a monster was trying to get in. The snow started to fall, thick and fast. Soon, they could not see anything out of the windows. It was just a wall of white, swirling snow. The truck shook a little from the force of the wind. Thomas was scared. He had never experienced wind so powerful. Are we safe in here?" he asked David. "Yes," David said, his voice calm and reassuring. "This truck is built for this. It is strong. We are safe. We just have to be patient." They could not go anywhere. They were trapped in their small metal box in the middle of a giant storm. To pass the time, David taught Thomas how to play chess. They played for hours. David told Thomas more stories about his adventures. He told him about a time he got lost in a whiteout, where the snow and sky become one, and you can't see anything. He explained how he used his compass and his knowledge to find his way back. The storm lasted for 2 days. For 2 long days, the wind howled and the snow fell. They ate their meals. They talked. They read, and they waited. Thomas started to understand what David meant when he said, "Antarctica teaches you humility." Outside, nature was showing its incredible power. Inside, they were just 2 small men, warm and safe, but completely at the mercy of the weather. They could do nothing but wait. On the morning of the 3rd day, Thomas woke up to silence. The wind had stopped. He looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling. The storm was over. They opened the door of the truck. The world outside was transformed. Everything was covered in a thick, new blanket of soft white snow. It was perfectly clean and untouched. The sun was coming out, and the new snow sparkled in the light. It was breathtakingly beautiful. The storm had been scary, but what it left behind was pure and lovely. "Time to go," David said, smiling. They spent an hour digging the trucks out of the deep snow that had piled up around it. The work was hard in the cold air, but Thomas felt good. He felt strong. The storm had not defeated them. They had waited, and now they could continue their journey. The experience made him feel a new level of respect for this place, and for his guide, David. After the storm, they continued their journey south. Their next destination was a very special and strange place called the McMurdo Dry Valleys. David had told Thomas about this place. "It's the opposite of what you think of Antarctica," David had explained. "It's a part of the continent with no ice or snow. It is one of the driest places on Earth. It looks more like the planet Mars than a part of Earth." Thomas was curious. A desert in the middle of all this ice. It was hard to imagine. They drove for several more days. The landscape began to change slowly. They started to see dark shapes in the distance. They were mountains. But these mountains were not covered in white snow. They were dark and rocky. As they got closer, Thomas saw that the ground was not white either. It was a mix of brown sand and dark rocks. There was no snow at all. David parked the truck at the edge of the valley. "Here we are," he said. "The dry valleys." They got out of the truck. The air was just as cold as anywhere else in Antarctica, but the view was completely different. It was a vast, empty valley. The ground was covered with loose rocks and reddish-brown sand. Huge, dark mountains with sharp peaks surrounded the valleys. There were no plants. There were no animals. There was nothing but rocks, sand, and wind. The wind was blowing hard through the valley, making a lonely whistling sound. It was the only sound. It felt like they were standing on another planet. Thomas had seen pictures of Mars from space probes, and this place looked just like it. It was alien and strange, but also very beautiful in its own way. "Why is there no snow here?" Thomas asked. "The mountains are very high," David explained. "They stop the ice from the main ice sheet from flowing into the valleys. Also, the winds here are very strong and very dry." Any snow that falls is quickly turned into vapor and blown away. They walked for a while into the valley. Their boots crunched on the loose rocks. Thomas looked around in awe. He saw strange rock formations, carved by the wind over millions of years. He saw a frozen lake at the bottom of the valley. The ice on the lake was not white, but crystal clear, and he could see strange, wavy formations frozen inside it. David told him that scientists love to study the dry valleys. They studied the rocks to understand the history of the earth. They also studied the soil. Even in this extreme environment, tiny, simple forms of life, called microbes, could be found living in the soil and inside the rocks. Scientists believe that if we ever find life on Mars, it might be like these tiny microbes. Thomas felt very small standing in that huge, empty valley. It felt like a place where time stood still. It was a window into a different world, a world without the life he was used to. It was a powerful reminder of how diverse and strange our planet can be. He took many pictures, but he knew the pictures could not fully capture the feeling of being there. It was a feeling of profound loneliness and wonder. They spent the whole day exploring the valley before returning to the warmth of their truck. That night, as Thomas wrote in his journal, he struggled to find the words to describe what he had seen. The white world of the penguins and the dark, rocky world of the dry valleys were both parts of Antarctica. It was a land of amazing contrasts. Their time in Antarctica was coming to an end. It was time to start the long journey back to the research station. They turned the big truck around and began to drive north. The journey back felt different. The landscape was the same endless white, but Thomas saw it with new eyes. He was not just a tourist anymore. He had lived in this world for a short time. He had felt its cold, seen its beauty, and respected its power. He had watched its animals and waited out its storms. He felt a connection to this land now. He spent the long hours in the truck, thinking about his adventure. He thought about the librarian Thomas, the man who only read about adventures in books. He felt like a different person now. He was braver. He was stronger. He had seen things he would never forget. He looked through the hundreds of pictures on his camera, the majestic icebergs, the funny penguins, the sleeping seals, the dancing southern lights, and the strange, empty, dry valleys. Each picture was a memory, a piece of his dream that had become real. He knew that when he was back in his small town, these pictures would help him remember everything. They would be his treasure. He thought about what David had said, that Antarctica teaches you humility. Thomas understood it now. When you stand in a place so vast, so powerful, and so pure, you realize how small you are. But it was not a bad feeling. It was a good feeling. It made you feel connected to the planet, to something much bigger than your own small life. The journey back was quiet. Thomas and David did not talk as much. They were comfortable in the silence together. They were now good friends, two people who had shared a great experience. Thomas knew he would miss David's calm presence and his wise words. Finally, after several days of driving, they saw the small, colorful buildings of the research station on the horizon. They were back. Their journey into the heart of Antarctica was over. When they arrived at the station, they were greeted by the other scientists. They were happy to see them return safely. That evening, they had a special dinner at the station to celebrate the end of their journey. Everyone shared stories and laughed. Thomas felt happy and tired. It was good to be around other people again. but a part of him already missed the quiet solitude of the ice. The next day, the icebreaker boat arrived to take him home. It was time to say goodbye. Thomas and David stood outside in the cold, clear air. "Thank you, David," Thomas said. "Thank you for everything. It was the adventure of a lifetime." "It was my pleasure, Thomas," David replied, shaking his hand. "I am glad I could share this place with you. Don't forget what you saw here." "I never will," Thomas said. He walked up the ramp and onto the boat. He stood on the deck and watched as the boat pulled away from the shore. David stood there, waving, until he was just a small red dot against the white snow. Thomas stayed on the deck for a long time, watching the white continent of Antarctica get smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared into the blue of the ocean. A tear rolled down his cheek, and it froze instantly in the cold air. It was a tear of sadness for leaving, but also a tear of joy for what he had experienced. The long journey home was a time for reflection. He was going back to his old life, to his quiet town and his job at the library. But he knew that he was not the same person who had left. The quiet librarian now had a heart full of adventure. He had a story to tell. When he finally arrived back in his small town, everything looked the same, but it felt different. The green trees seemed greener. The warm air felt warmer. He appreciated the simple comforts of his home in a new way. He went back to work at the library. He put his books back on the shelves, just like before. But now, when he saw a book about explorers or faraway lands, he would smile. He was one of them now. In the evenings, he would look at his pictures. He would show them to his friends and tell them stories about the penguins, the storms, and the vast silent world of ice. He told them that Antarctica was not just a cold, empty place. It was a place full of life, beauty, and power. He told them it was important to protect it, to keep it clean and pure for the future. Thomas lived a long and happy life. He never went on another adventure as big as his journey to Antarctica, but he didn't need to. That one journey was enough. It had filled his heart with enough wonder to last a lifetime. And sometimes, on a quiet night, he would look up at the stars and remember the dancing green lights in the Antarctic sky. He would remember the feeling of standing at the bottom of the world, a small man in a vast land of ice. And he would smile, the quiet explorer, forever grateful for his journey to the coldest place on Earth. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please subscribe to my channel for more stories to help you learn English. Thank you for listening.